Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring.
Welcome back to Shared Humanity. My name is Nelba Márquez-Greene, where I interview the humans behind the headlines of gun violence. It's my hope that after listening to this podcast, you would be moved to action by the sharing of their stories. Today's guest is Tara Donnelly. She is a survivor advocate, a mom, and a CFO of a real estate private equity firm. Welcome, Tara.
Thank you so much for having me, Nelba.
So I always take very deep breaths when I talk to someone about their story, and I want to make sure that you feel comfortable and safe in sharing the pieces you would want for people to hear and learn from. What else would you want us to know about you?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, and I'm so honored to be here and chat with you. And I think before we jump into anything, I think it's important to name that we're able to have this conversation because of what I think is a beautiful gift that you gave me when we were chatting about doing this episode. And I said, I don't know how or in what capacity I could share my story and what I've been through when speaking to you and all you have endured. And you very gracefully responded, both things can be true, that you can endure your own loss and speak about it and not be able to fathom, what life is like in your shoes. So I just want to thank you for that. And also add, in your words that you said we need to share all of these stories and not everyone's experience is different, but there's so many of us who have been and continue to be impacted by gun violence. So I just wanted to thank you for that and the opportunity to do that and share my story.
So let's talk a little bit about that because that comes up almost every single time. Mm-hmm. You're talking about a hierarchy of grief or pain or story that seems to live in the gun violence prevention space.
Yeah.
That almost keeps us from talking to one another because no one wants to offend or hurt the other person. Mm-hmm. I lost a 6-year-old. Who did you lose?
I lost my mother and father on the same day in the same incident. It was February 2nd, 2005. We had a family jewelry store in Fairfield, Connecticut, and they were closing down the shop for the night. They were two of the kindest, they were simple, just genuinely good people. And they were shutting down the store for the night, and a young man walked in telling my dad he was looking to purchase an engagement ring. And as he got closer to the counter, he instead pulled out a gun. And he shot my dad. My dad died immediately, we believe. And my mom turned to call the police, and she was shot. Combined, they were shot 11 times. And my dad died immediately, and my mom died as paramedics were working on her.
I think once we hear each other's stories, there's no way we can have hierarchy.
Right.
Not after that. Thank you for sharing about your parents. I've, in a little background for today, everything I read was that they were the stars of the community, the people that everybody knew, the kindest, warmest, Tim and Kim, together very early. They have this family, they have you, they have your brother, Eric, and they run this family jewelry store together. And it's a second generation, right? Because your grandparents are also in the jewelry business.
They were, yes. That's how my dad got into it. And, I would say, what you read is correct. But in the same sense, they weren't the stars of the community where like they were, out in public all the time. They were sort of just like the even keeled.
Sounds like they were stars in kindness.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, particularly my dad and his gift of gab, was able to make anybody a friend. He would go to run an errand and come back with a new friend, at the bank or wherever he was picking something up. He just saw the humanity in all people and just made friends everywhere he went.
One of the stories that you told me about your dad is that if someone had to go pick up something that they had dropped off for repair or were picking up to purchase, that they would have to set up a long time because you couldn't just go in there and pick up your item.
Yeah.
You were family if you went into that jewelry store.
You were. Yeah. And he loved that aspect of the job because, you go to a jewelry store, you're purchasing a gift often to commemorate something. And he just thought how cool it was to be a part of that and to be able to commemorate that. And he truly loved it. And because his gift of gab sometimes got in the way, he also kind of wasn't the best with deadlines. So there were, on more than one occasion, he got to go to the event because he was delivering it at the last minute. But, he just, and my mom too, they just loved being a part of the community and being a part of the lives of people who started off as customers and became friends.
Mm-hmm. And this was February of 2005.
Mm-hmm.
And you and your brother became young people who no longer had living parents and who lost them to gun violence.
Right.
How would you explain parts of the experience you feel comfortable sharing to someone who may not have lived a gun violence incident?
It's a difficult question. There's so many elements and aspects of it. I think that we even try to understand ourselves as survivors and explaining to someone else. I think I would say it's something and a grief that is with you always. It's certainly not something that you ever get over, but it also evolves, the response to it and the grief, and it changes because I'm a very different person than I was, nearly 20 years ago, and I miss them in very different ways than I did back then. It's so hard to try and encompass, all of the multifaceted aspects of it that come with it, particularly, just the grief of having lost one parent and both parents and, the trauma aspect of it. And although, not nearly as publicized as Sandy Hook, but having, the people that you love the most on the front page of the paper every day, there's so much that goes with it. And now, that it's not in the headlines anymore, trying to navigate that with my kids, it's with you for the rest of your life is, I guess, what I would say to someone is although, the average person only sees your particular story in the headlines for so long, it's with the people impacted. The people who are impacted, it's with them forever.
And that's why I titled it Shared Humanity, the humans behind the headlines. I want for people to understand that whether a story is in the front page or whatever page or not
at all.
Yeah. We're still living it. We're still living it long after the cameras go away, and in some cases, the ones that never show up for those deaths and those losses. I've never been in a room with other survivors where the pain was different because there were 4 cameras and not 2, or, I've never, it's not that. It's just, it's the loss of your person. And in your case, the loss of 2 of your people. So thank you for sharing that. I was going to ask you how your grief has evolved from 20 years until now, because people who might not know might say, it's been 20 years, right? And how do you answer that?
I used to say that. I remember when they first passed away, getting cards from so many people. And I remember one of them was from someone I didn't know, but they had said they had lost their dad 15 years ago. And I remember reading it being like, not understanding that that's it. Like I said, it's with you forever. My grief now has evolved, as my life has evolved. Right now, I'm a parent without parents, and that's very different than, when I was a very recent college graduate. When the incident happened, I had just moved out of their house. I had just graduated college. I was living at home, just moved to my first apartment in New York City, started working. It was, I was set up for what I viewed to be the most exciting time of my life. And this happened. So those first years were just trying to get by and staying above water. I wasn't someone who jumped right into advocacy. I was just trying to survive and navigate and get up. And today my grief is different. It's, navigating life with two kids without my mom and dad here, and trying to honor their memory and keep them alive through stories, and trying to have them play some role in the lives of my kids by telling them about them. It's a lot. It's difficult. It's very difficult.
And I would imagine that you were keeping the memory of your mom and dad alive for your children, and you're doing activism, and you're doing your work, you're doing so many different parts of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And also trying to put one foot in front of the other every single day. And that doesn't ever change.
Right. It doesn't. It's something you deal with for the rest of your life. And I think also the older I get, I think the magnitude of what I experienced becomes more clear to me. I think because I was technically out of college and living on my own, I was like, well, I was an adult. And now looking back, I realize, and looking at, I'll say kids who recently graduated college, it's like, they're not really adults, and it's just, I realized the severity of what that experience was, and trying to have a lot more grace with myself, and what the healing journey looks like, because a lot of times you don't get to dictate where you are,
That's very true. And grace is an important word and facet. And as you try to talk to your children and integrate ways of remembering their grandparents, you also participate in advocacy. Can you tell us what some of your advocacy steps have been since February of 2005?
Absolutely. As I mentioned, I'm not someone who woke up the next day and was like, I'm going to change this. For me, it was a lot of years of just navigating grief, but it was, quite honestly, it was Sandy Hook, the proximity of I was born. We lived in Newtown when I was born. I was living in New York City at the time, and it was also becoming a parent. I remember so vividly the day my daughter was born and holding her in the hospital and just having that overwhelming feeling of, I need to protect her. This isn't about me anymore. This is a responsibility. And almost instantly from there, it became not just about my child, it was all children. And, as you know, gun violence is the leading cause of death of children in this country. And it's the survivors who are working so hard to try and change that. So in my advocacy work, I work closely with Kristen and Mike Song, advocating for safe storage. Kristen, I know, who is on
a guest on this podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Ethan's Law was passed in Connecticut. And in 2023, we expanded Ethan's Law in the state of Connecticut to apply to all homes with firearms as opposed to just homes with minors.
So I'm going to stop and take a deep breath here, because I know you have a poignant story that you can share about why the expansion of Ethan's Law. Mm-hmm. So tell us first a little bit about Ethan's Law, and then tell us about the expansion and the steps that got you there.
Sure. So Ethan's Law, it's very simple in concept. If you own a gun and you're not in proximity of it, it has to be locked up and secured so that someone who should not have access to the gun doesn't get access. And in Ethan's Law, it's specifically for minors. And it is relevant to me because the young man who killed my mom and dad had a drug addiction And he fueled that addiction for over 10 years by way of committing petty crimes. So he stole cars and broke into homes. And he broke into a home in Greenwich, Connecticut in December of 2004. And he opened the drawer to a nightstand, presumably looking for valuables, and he got a gun. And that changed the trajectory of so many lives, and mine included. A few weeks after obtaining the gun, which he legally could not purchase because of his criminal record for those petty crimes. He had been in and out of jail. He was actually on parole in California and made his way to Connecticut. A few weeks after he obtained the gun, he first robbed a jewelry store in Long Island, and that jeweler was killed. And a few weeks after that, he came into my mom and dad's store. So it's hard for me to think about how different my life would be if that gun had just been locked up. And in lobbying for the expansion of Ethan's Law, I made a phone call to the man whose house was broken into, whose gun was stolen, and ultimately whose gun killed my mom and dad.
You made a phone call to the owner
of
the gun that was used, not the person who committed the crime. No. But the owner of the gun that was stolen.
I wanted to know how, what transpired after his gun was stolen. I wanted to know how it impacted him, and I was hopeful that he might testify. I know that, lobbying up in Hartford, it can be very vocal on both ends,
Right.
And I thought that, of course, I could share my story, but I thought with fellow gun owners, his voice might carry more weight than my own. And I was hopeful that he might be willing to speak about that. So when I did have the phone call with him, the first thing he said was, "I'm so sorry." And he said, "What happened haunts me every day." And I went into that phone call very, thinking very much about what I was going to say and explain why it mattered to me. And I wasn't expecting an apology. And it sort of just knocked the wind out of me for a minute, because it wasn't an apology I knew that I needed. And it wasn't lost on me that it has impacted him. And I think that matters. And I think other gun owners need to know that, it's not a matter of taking your firearms away. It's ensuring that they don't get into the hands of the wrong person, whether it be a child, whether it be someone, who's not in the right mental state to have access to a gun, or a criminal who shouldn't have a gun, because it's a very small margin of people who are not responsible with their guns, but the results are catastrophic. And it's such a simple step.
It's a small number of people who do the wrong thing, but every single one of us is part of the ecosystem in charge of doing the right thing.
Right. Exactly.
And that's what matters. And did he ever testify? Did he go?
He did not. He gave me a sentence or two that he was willing to allow me to share. I was hoping that as a compromise, he could write a testimony and I could read it on his behalf. What he ultimately ended up saying was that he believed that anyone who was a gun owner, and if they're not home, they should lock up their gun, which, I was grateful for having that much. My intent was not to publicize him or try to shame him this many years later. It was all an effort for change. If it was a different perspective that would impact other gun owners, then that's worthwhile to me. It was much less about, again, like trying to blame or punish him. It was more so about his willingness to lend his voice to change, to keep more people alive so that someone else is not in my shoes.
And it did. And you expanded, you added to Ethan's Law the work of Kristen and Mike Song in honor of their son, who was also tragically lost. You've done a lot of activism with Kristen and Mike Song on Ethan's Law. And I know you were just at the 1-year anniversary of the Office of White House Gun Violence Prevention, the executive orders. Tell us more of what you've done in the almost 20 years.
Yeah. Like I said, I got more involved in the activism and advocacy aspect, once I became a parent, which is almost 9 years ago. And there's so many different capacities in which you can get involved, whether it be local, state and local laws or federally. So like I said, we worked hard to initially pass Ethan's law in Connecticut and expanding it in 2023, and just hitting the pavement down in DC, sitting down with any legislator willing to talk to us and really trying to find common ground. Because I think the more conversations you have, you realize the less divisive it is. It's just about securing guns, keeping them out of the wrong hands. And, it's hard to be opposed to that, even among gun owners. And most gun owners already practice safe storage. So a lot of my advocacy is specifically around safe storage, but gun violence is a multifaceted epidemic, and there's so many avenues and so many elements of it to touch upon. So I wish there was one law that could be passed that would end this epidemic overnight, but obviously that's not the case. So
it takes all hands on deck.
And
so many. And what would you say to a person who's looking at this and going, I want to get involved? I want to get involved. Where should I start?
I would say there's space. There's space for everyone. And it doesn't even necessarily need to be in the legislative arena. There's, like I said, gun violence is impacting so many people. I can't name a demographic. I can't name an age group, a race, a religion, an ethnicity in this country that has not been touched by gun violence.
Right.
And I struggle because it impacts all of us. And at the same time, we can't come together even to name that it is a problem,
right.
Something that is the leading cause of death of children in this country. And why is this such an uphill battle? I think that's the part I struggle with the most. And I think there's space for anyone who wants to get involved. And wherever your talents or strengths might be, there's a need for it. Whether it be in laws and legislation, whether it be in, healing and survivors and community, or if it's work in, prevention in the sense before it gets to acquiring a gun. What does someone life look like that leads them to pick up the gun? You can help in that regard, in mental health and making people feel accepted. There's so many elements of it.
I tell people that all the time. First, identify the thing you're good at,
mm-hmm.
and then work in that, because
mm-hmm.
no one's walk in activism has to look the same.
Right.
So I'm in agreement with you on that. And when you're going to DC, or when you're on TV, or when
mm-hmm.
you're doing these many different things in the activism space, do your kids ever say, Mom, what are you doing? Do they ask questions?
They do. They do. And
how do you frame this for them?
It has evolved as they have gotten older. I used to keep it very separate from them, just to protect them.
Yeah.
And now that they are older, they are 8 and 6 now, and they both know what happened to their grandparents. And they know that I'm working really hard to keep other people safe. That first night that I held my daughter, I made a promise to her, and I made the same promise to my son when he was born 2 years later, that when I had the conversation with them about what happened to their grandparents, I would be sure to be able to tell them what I have done since then to make this country safer for them. And that has been so important to me. And I've worked really hard
to keep your promise.
To keep that promise.
Yeah.
To keep that promise. And they understand it a little more now, but, still try to keep it age appropriate. It's terrifying to be a child in this country, to do lockdown drills. And so they understand, when I go down to DC, and my daughter got to meet the president, which was exciting for her. And as they get older, they understand a bit more and more.
And you do some local community things too. You do something called GV Angels. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, I will. And that's another way that I'm able to involve my kids. So GV Angels is a holiday drive that we started 7 years ago for children who have been impacted by gun violence. And the first year, it started because I saw a post online for a similar, if not the exact program in a different state. And I wanted to contribute to that. But at the same time, I was like, there are so many kids locally, we don't have anything like this here. So that first year, I think I just did like a Facebook post and said, I wanted to shop for kids who had been impacted. And if you want to contribute, send me a gift card. And I think we shopped for 26 kids that year. The first year. Yeah. And it was all just, again, it was working. There's so many wonderful GVP organizations, specifically in Bridgeport, which is where I grew up and where my parents lived. And so there's so many phenomenal GVP groups there. So families that we know through working with those groups. So that first year, I just got all the gift cards I could and, said, what do these children need? What would they like? And that was 26 kids. And just starting the process now for our 7th year. And last year we had a little over 120 children that we shopped for, which is not a number you actually want to see grow. You want to reach out and, help as many children and its family as possible, but to know that there are over 120 children locally who know the loss of gun violence. And it's predominantly children who have lost a parent, and it's predominantly fathers. And just knowing that there's that many young children who know that loss.
I want to be clear that people are actually understanding what you are saying. You're saying you have started an initiative called GV Angels, and you have easily identified 120 children in one city in Connecticut alone who know the pain of losing someone to gun violence, and it's usually a father. And that's in one city.
That's in one city, yes.
So we should sit with that for a second because the numbers are pretty staggering. And you're right. They shouldn't grow, but we know that they will. Tara, if people want to support GV Angels, what's the best way to do that?
Sure. So it's all very grassroots, and I start around this time of year reaching out to the families to find out what those needs and wants are. And I gather them all together and simply make a sign-up genius so that people can shop for someone that I would say speaks to them. If so that's one way my kids have gotten involved is my kids pick out a child that's at the same age and gender for them as them. And they like to, my daughter likes to shop for a little girl and my son likes to shop for a little boy. So if someone wanted to participate as a shopper, because again, 120 kids times 3 needs and 3 wants is a lot.
It gets up there. Yeah.
It's a lot. So if you send an email to gvangelsct, that's gvangelsct@gmail.com, I can add your name to the distribution list of that sign-up genius once it's available. And you just shop, and all the instructions are on there as far as where to send the gift and whatnot. But even signing up for one gift, I think truly makes a difference.
And if someone wants to send a donation, they want to say, you know what, I may not have time to go shopping. Can they also do it at GV Angel CT?
They can send an email.
Gift card. They can send an email.
They can send an email, and we can connect. And then also, I should add that if you know a family that has been impacted by gun violence, particularly a child that is, and it doesn't even need to be need-based. If anyone who has been impacted by gun violence and you would like them to be a recipient, please also to that same email address.
You can nominate a family.
Of course. Yeah. We've never turned a family away. No.
Wonderful. You, when you started this, said a little bit about your family, and I know you have a brother. A brother who was 2 years older than you. Is 2 years older than you. How is your brother?
He's great. He's great. he works here.
That's right.
He's
works
a colleague
here.
of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, we're both on very similar and at the same time individual grief journeys. Right. It's something we both experienced and, sometimes navigate the same way and some ways navigate very differently.
And he also adds another layer to how he manages his grief and processes, things that happen, and that's through art. Mm-hmm. And when we were doing one of our calls in preparation for this, you said, my brother wrote some songs. Mm-hmm. And I spent quite a bit of time listening to his music. Mm-hmm. The band is the Alternate Roots. Mm-hmm. And I was just floored. I was floored by the sensitivity, by the artistry, mm-hmm. by the beauty and the pain all captured in lyric and in music. Mm-hmm. And I know the Dean Megan Rennie, who runs this whole shop here at the Yale School of Public Health, she's also interested in the intersection of using art mm-hmm. as a way of processing, healing, managing a gun violence and gun violence loss. And if it's okay with you, there's one song in particular called Somewhere in America. Mm-hmm. And I just like to read some of the lyrics. Is that all right? And this is from the heart of Eric Donnelly, sung by the Alternate Roots, his band. And he is a colleague of ours here at Yale. And the last stanza of his song, Somewhere in America, speaks to where he is now, having a child of his own. He has two children of his own.
He had
now.
one at the time, but yes.
But he only had one at the time of this song, and just where he is. And that stanza, it reads like this: "The years have been kind." Sorry, guys, this is gonna be rough. Okay, so this is the stanza, and I'm just gonna read it as he wrote it. "The years have been kind. I've got a son now of my own. When I think of what I'll tell him, what happened to you, I still don't know. That the world's a much safer place. That kind of danger you won't ever have to face. And I pray he lives to see that day. No idea what I'm going to say. Somewhere in America, the phone is about to ring. And nothing can prepare you for the news it's going to bring. And all this time we've been waiting, time spent debating, somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring. Somewhere in America." Your brother, Eric Donnelly, using his art to put into music the experience of so many of us, right? The experience that happens over 100 times, almost 120 times a day. That somewhere in America, a phone is going to ring and you'll never be prepared for the news on the other end. And that's why I try really hard through this podcast and also in all of my work to remind survivors that there is no hierarchy, that there is no rank order, that we are in this together in pain and in finding solutions, and hopefully in teaching others what they can do to take action and also have hope through these stories that you, like yours, that you have generously shared with our audience. Thank you, Tara.
Thank you so much.
An unlucky break, wrong time, wrong place. I've heard them all so many times. If your dad had had a gun of his own, maybe they'd still be alive. But I still can't believe the resistance, the denial, and the insistence. When something's broken that clearly needs fixing, you can fight to change, or you can fight to stay the same. And somewhere in America, the news is about to break. And Somewhere in America, the news is about to break.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Shared Humanity. This is a podcast produced by the Yale School of Public Health. Follow us on social media at Yale SPH and learn more at sph.yale.edu/shared humanity. Thank you to the Yale Porvu Center and Yale Broadcast Studio for their support. Until next time.
Somewhere in America, a phone is about to ring.